Hi, I'm Ken Roberts. I'm the president of Region 1 of the DRBF, and we have a great panel today. Big shout out to Mike Vitale for helping us put this together. It's the use of escalation clauses for heavy civil projects. And I'm Ken Roberts. I chair the construction law group at Venable. And this is a clause, this is an issue that I can tell you comes up almost every week on projects that we have, with a huge discussion as to should there be escalation clauses, shouldn't there, how do you handle it? The four panelists we have are divided between owners and contractors. First person that you're going to hear from is Justin Carl. He is the general manager and the CEO of AlexRenew. Leads a team that delivers large-scale environmental infrastructure programs. He's been the lead on over $1.6 billion of planning, design, and procurement and construction of water-focused projects in the DC metro area for the last 15 years. In addition, we're going to hear from Doug Gabriel, who he is the Deputy Director of Engineering and Construction for the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. He has over 40 years of experience as a director, program construction manager on public works. What's interesting about Doug is that he is responsible for all capital construction, including on the project Clear Lake, which is a $3 billion 25-year program. And to date, Doug has delivered over $1.5 billion on projects since 2010. From the contracting side, we're going to hear from Tony O'Donnell. Tony is the area manager with Kiewit Underground District. He leads Kiewit's teams on the majority of their non-traditional underground pursuits in North America. Tony has been involved on some of the biggest tunneling projects in North America, including the WMATA New Hampshire Avenue Tunnel, the Portland Tunnel, and $707 million round out West Branch bypass tunnel just north of New York. Very experienced and on tunneling on these issues with escalation. And finally, last but not least, is Mike Roach. Mike is a 36-year veteran with Trailer Brothers. He has extensive experience with water, wastewater, mass transit, railway tunnels in North America. He is the chief engineer and estimator for Trailer Brothers Underground Division, and he recently published The History of Tunneling in the US. With that, it's a great panel. First person we're going to hear from is going to be Justin Carl.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks to the DRBF for giving AlexRenew the space to share our message with respect to escalation on our tunnel project. Before we get into it, just wanted to mention that the River Renew Tunnel Project, this is a picture here of our main construction site where we're constructing our waterfront tunnel and our pumping stations within this shaft shown here in the screen. We're about 2.5 years into construction. A notice to proceed date was issued in December 2020. Just a quick overview about AlexRenew, our organization. We are an independent authority located in Alexandria, Virginia. We were established in 1952 with the sole mission to manage wastewater for the city of Alexandria and portions of Fairfax County. For those of you not familiar with Alexandria, we're located just across the Potomac River from the District of Columbia. You can see here on the left, this is our wastewater treatment plant. And the construction site right in the center of our wastewater plant where we're building the waterfront tunnel. You can see the beginning of our shaft construction here in the center of the plant. Just a little overview of the tunnel project. This is a one-off project for AlexRenew. This is not part of a larger program. Once we finish this project, we will be complete with the goals of the project here in Alexandria. The main drivers for the River Renew Tunnel project are 4 combined sewer outfalls that currently pollute the Potomac River and its tributaries with about 140 million gallons of sewage each year. Those outfalls are shown here in this map, outfall 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what the tunnel project is the dark blue line on the east side of AlexRenew is 140 foot deep, 2.1 mile long, 12-foot diameter tunnel constructed using an EPB TBM in Potomac clay and alluvium. Some terrace as well under the Potomac River. Our tunnel boring machine was designed by Heron Connect in Toronto, Germany, and we received that in July of 2022. On the west side of the project, the purple line is a 6-foot diameter open cut pipeline that we call the Hoofs Run Interceptor. That's mainly a conveyance line to bring flows from outfalls 3 and 4 down to the wastewater plant for treatment. At AlexRenew, and what we saw in the previous slide, are our binocular or snowman shafts that will be converted into our screening facility, as well as our 20 and 130 MGD pumping station will be housed in those shafts. They're about 13 stories deep. Total cost of the job is $454.4 million. Notice to proceed for this project was given in December 2020, and we have a legislative mandate to have the job done by July 1st, 2025. So we are extremely schedule-driven project. The legislation that was passed to complete the project by July 1st, 2025 was enacted in April 2017, which really constrained our planning and design phases. So when the project was bid, the pandemic hit in the middle of our procurement process. We shortlisted to 3 teams and issued our request for proposal documents in February 2020. A week after we had our collaboration kickoff meeting with the shortlisted teams, the pandemic hit and we shut down. So I guess the 2 things that were beneficial from the pandemic gave us the ability to have some foreseeability into the future of what the pandemic may end up doing to construction. It certainly did not give us the ability to see the escalation that would follow. And it also gave us incredibly low interest rates on the loans used to fund the program. So given that the pandemic hit at the very beginning of our collaboration process on our fixed price design build job, we were able to have discussions with the shortlisted proposers on various terms and conditions in the contract to make a level playing field and really equalize the playing field with respect to COVID risk. So what we ended up doing is we established COVID-19 allowance payment items for various PPE, nurse practitioner, which I'll explain in a later slide. We also were able to have some foreseeability on COVID with respect to changes. We do have a foreseeability clause for COVID-19 if it were to get worse than when the job was bid in December 2020. And it also gave us the ability to have change orders for delays in material or equipment. We all had a flex during COVID with collaborative meetings. Our entire procurement process was held virtually. On the owner's side, we started this job with no float. We gave up what minimal float we had, which was about 60 days, and also delayed liquidated damages for an additional 60 days in response to the pandemic and what may happen during construction. And we also pivoted over to electronic proposal submissions. So I wanted to start talking about escalation through the framework of our allowances that we established in the contract for COVID. So we were trying to think ahead to see what would one level the playing field for our bidders ahead of receiving technical and price proposals. And based on collaboration with the shortlisted design build teams, we came up with these 5 allowance items, really to manage the risk of COVID-19 that were included in the overall lump sum cost of the job. In addition to that, and I mentioned in the last slide, we could also have a contract change for if COVID were to get worse than it was in the baseline condition in September of 2020, or we saw delays in the delivery of equipment and materials, so the contractor could issue a change order for those reasons as well. Like most contracts, this is standard EJ CDC language. Like most contracts, our contract does not consider monetary relief for escalation or inflation. And these are the words lifted straight from our contract, that the risk of market conditions be exclusively borne by the design builder. And that includes labor, equipment, materials, and other goods and services. When we first started this job in December and gave notice to proceed in December 2020, we had like most big jobs, had a partnering session. And through that partnering session, we wanted to establish trust between the owner and the design builder. One of the things that we said, and it took a while for us to develop this trust, but if there's anything you need, please be honest with us. Let us know if you're having issues on the job. Let's have conversation about it. We're here to help. We might not be able to help with every last thing on the job, but we're here to help. So as everybody knows, we're on this panel today because the ongoing effects of the pandemic have had a lasting effect on the construction industry. On the left-hand side of the page, you can see some of the news headlines. Everybody's very familiar with that. We've had unprecedented escalation on projects. And on the right, we've summarized what the escalation was on our job around about 6 months ago. So you can see everything from concrete to fuel has been impacted by escalation. And this information was shared with us because we were able to develop enough trust with our design build team, Trailer Shea, to come to us and have a straight conversation regarding the impacts they were seeing on the construction side. So concrete about 10%, all the way up to fuel impacts at 110%. So in sticking with our partnering guidelines, we developed a post-bid escalation clause. And that's beneficial both for the owner, and it's also beneficial for our contractor or design build team as well. And really to address the excessive costs. What it does, it supports us as an organization, who we are and what we do to support clean water in the region. We're very focused on achieving substantial completion by July 1st, 2025. And then we also looked at this from the owner's side. With the escalation clause, we could also mitigate, claims, maintain quality, mitigate delays, and really keep the job on track. So we saw benefits to both sides, and we had already allotted money in the bid of the job to help cover impacts to COVID. So we put together a change order with the escalation clause framework. This summarizes our 64-page escalation clause on one slide, but really we're reliant on producer price indices for all commodities on the job. For things like deep breaker system, pumps, specialized equipment, we're going to use purchase orders that were at the time of bid and current purchase orders. Our adjustment limits are up to 100%. The first 5% of escalation is assigned to the design builder. And we came to an agreement very early on. We can't cover every last tool or piece of equipment on the job. We're just going to focus on the big stuff to try and make a meaningful dent on escalation. So our adjustment periods for PPI, producer price indices, were September 2020, and then whatever the purchase month that the design builder was buying rebar or materials or other equipment at that time. Our adjustment was based on the percent change in PPI, unit price, and then the actual quantity of the material procured. And then we're processing our escalation through a monthly payout process, and it's drawing from a new allowance payment item that we put together as part of the change order. We are not covering labor and escalation. It is material costs only. So just put together a really quick example for steel. We get backup information as part of our pay app for 60 tons. The unit price is $800 a ton. In December 2020, the PPI was $225. At this point, when we put the slide together, the current PPI is $377. Percent change was 68%. Design builders on the hook for the first 5%, and we issue a payment amount of $30,000. How do we come up with our value? Again, we had allowances that weren't being used with respect to COVID-19. So this slide just shows what we have above the line, all the lump sum work. On this job, it's like $390 million. Below the line is the additional that gets you to the 454.4. Our escalation allowance is outside of our project contingency allowance that was established as part of a risk register process. on the job. And it really included those COVID-19 allowances that I showed you prior on the prior slide. We also combined that with a award fee and some other miscellaneous items that were no longer being used below the line. And we came up with an escalation allowance of 18.6 million. And that is what we're billing against today through our payout process. Our goal overall was to keep our contract price at 454.4 with this escalation clause. See where we go in the next few months. Some lessons learned. Us as an owner, always being available and flexible, listening to the needs of the design builder or contractor, getting feedback both during and after our procurement process, really setting up a way for two-way conversations. For the contractors, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think this is the second thing Mike Krolls brought to us on the job outside of a concrete delay early on, and we worked with them collaboratively to address both issues. And then what that really does between an owner and contractor can develop a culture of trust and really help make the job an overall success.
Justin, that was great. One quick question. How long did it take you to negotiate the post-bid escalation clause?
Took us about 6 months, Ken, to go through it.
Okay.
The negotiation piece was relatively straightforward. It was really putting the framework together and the how and what gets included.
And was the contractor active in that negotiation of what went in?
100%. We were. It was a collaborative process from the day we started conversations all the way through the day we issued the change order.
Excellent. All right. I know we'll have some questions at the end for you, but it was a great baseline for this discussion. Next, we're going to have a different perspective on it from Doug and his work on the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Ken. And next slide, please. So a little background on Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. We were formed in 1972 as a political subdivision of the state of Ohio. We are a regional provider of wastewater conveyance and treatment and stormwater management. The district itself is comprised of 62 member communities, with the city of Cleveland being one of those members. We have a service area of approximately 380 square miles and about 1 million customers. We're governed by a seven-member board of trustees. The board of trustees is made up by the member communities. And we own and operate 3 wastewater treatment plants, easterly, westerly, and southerly. Southerly being the largest wastewater treatment plant in the state of Ohio. So I'm with the engineering and construction department, and we in engineering and construction are responsible for the delivering of the wastewater capital program, including our consent order, Project Clean Lake. And so annually, our capital expenditures are between about 175 and 200 million per year. We've been averaging that over the last 10 to 12 years. So included in all that capital is Project Clean Lake, and Project Clean Lake is a $3 billion 25-year consent order to reduce combined sewer overflows into Lake Erie and its tributaries. So the heart of Project Clean Lake is 7 deep storage tunnels. There's pump stations and then also near surface conveyance. So of the 7 tunnels, 4 are presently constructed and complete. Number 5, the shoreline storage tunnel, is presently in construction. And then the next one in line is the southerly storage tunnel, which is presently at a 90% design, and we will be going out for bids this fall. With all the work we have going on presently, we have 66 open design and construction contracts with a value of a little bit over 750 million. So we as an agency need to follow the Ohio Revised Code requirements. So per the Ohio Revised Code, we have to publicly advertise anything to bid over $50,000, and we can only make an award to a bidder whose bid is within 10% of a published engineer's estimate. And then here on the right, this is our shoreline storage tunnel main mining site. So the shoreline storage tunnel is a $200 million soft ground tunnel. So we have a standard construction agreement, and within that standard construction agreement, it states that basically the price you bid is the price you will be paid to build the work. The only way we can modify that is for material changes in the contract or changes in the work. Things like escalation, we do not recognize because they are not changes in the work. It's a marketplace type issue. And to modify those terms and conditions of the contract would require us to go to our Board of Trustees and gain their approval. So use of escalation clauses. Like I said, the district does not have an escalation clause in their construction contracts. So as such, we do not entertain requests for additional costs due to escalation. And like I said earlier, we have 66 open contracts. More than half of those are construction contracts. And really to date, it has not been an issue. We've had some requests for a price adjustment due to escalation, but not that many. As an agency, we're not completely heartless. We do provide relief to contractors for delays to the critical path caused by supply chain issues. And what we do is we do issue excusable, non-compensable time extensions for those delays. We do build in escalation into our published engineer's estimate. So before we publish that number, we do quite a bit of analysis looking at the marketplace, the duration of the job, what's in it. Is it a plant job? Is it a tunnel job? Is it a collections job? Where are the costs? What costs could be affected over the duration of the contract? And then we build that into that published estimate. The same goes for supply chain issues. Presently, we have a series of control upgrade type contracts. We're very cognizant that those delays in those contracts are significant in trying to get materials and trying to get programmable logic controllers in their cards. So as such, the overall contract duration was extended to help mitigate some of those supply chain issues. So we continue to bid work and receive good bids. So presently at our Easterly wastewater plant, we have a stock room relocation project. This is more of a building type contract for about 13 million. In our collection system, we have a PLC replacement project presently out for bid for 12.3 million. Here in mid-June, we will be advertising for an upgrade at the Southerly wastewater plant in the second stage aeration tanks. That will have a published estimate of 41 million. And then this fall, as I said earlier, the Southerly storage tunnel will come out to bid. Presently, we're sitting at 325 million for that project.
Excellent. That was great, Doug. Quick question. Did number one, and when COVID first hit, did you have any contractors trying to claim a force majeure clause?
Several.
And was that mostly, could you figure out, was that due to getting lack of people on the site, or was it part of that escalation, or was that supply chain, or all of the above?
It was really all of the above. It was, trying to maintain manpower on the project. And then the impacts and global impacts in the supply chain. So for those, we did a schedule analysis and we provided the contractors with excusable, non-compensable time extensions for the lost time due to COVID.
Okay. With all those contracts you have out, do you have any claims that are escalation based or partially based?
We have a couple right now that we've been dealing with. But those have been quiet for a little bit of time.
Okay, great. So just to start the dialogue, you got really two different approaches one from Justin Carl, the second from Doug Gabriel. Now we're going to flip and we're going to hear from the contractor side. And the first person we're going to hear from is Tony O'Donnell, again, area manager with Kiewitz Underground District. Tony?
Hello, can everyone hear?
Yes, excellent.
Great. Yeah, I'm calling in from the West Coast, so time zone is a little different. So I thought I would talk sort of in three buckets. First bucket would be just to give you a background of the company I'm working with, talk through how we approach escalation. And then the final part is almost from a contractor's perspective, perhaps educate owners on some of the challenges that at times they may not hear about, but are truly real from our perspective. So I'm from the contractor side. I happen to work with a company that is doing work across a whole bunch of different markets. Our revenues are in excess of 12 billion a year. And I would say from an industry in general, certainly escalation was simpler in the past. It's obviously got far more challenging because of COVID, for sure. And I would also say even something like Ukraine war and the sort of geopolitical challenges that come with that. So within probably a 5-year period of time, I think as an industry, we've certainly seen, gosh, this stuff can really happen. So with that in mind, over the years, we've certainly developed an approach that is very much market driven. We are certainly careful in our study of escalation provisions and contracts. And it becomes so much more important with the size of contracts you're looking at. From the point of view of it, relatively small stuff, you can deal with it, but when the jobs get bigger and more complicated, it becomes true legitimate dollars that from a construction company perspective, you really got to sort of sit down and evaluate if this is beyond your acceptable risk profile. We definitely look at escalation in a couple of different buckets. I would say labor and equipment, and what I mean by equipment is cranes and loaders we use to build the work. They are more tangible, and because we have generally job agreements on labor, we can get our arms around that. And then we do a commodity study on the commodities themselves. We have teams that specialize in looking at various commodities and doing our own independent commodity study on what escalation risks are likely and what likely we may have to include in our proposals. I think we are also looking at if we have to include contingency on that. When it comes to the challenges that are out there and that are becoming more and more sort of just acute, I would say the sheer size of some of the projects and the range of commodities you're looking at and where you have to go to get these some of these unique specialty equipments, that in itself is a big deal. The vendors themselves from the flow, flowing clauses down, there's a lot of pushback on vendors accepting some of the main contract terms. So as the contractor, you are stuck in the middle of trying to use relationships to lock in some expected escalation considerations so that you're not the one stuck in the middle. And then I would say what becomes more and more important is when you're dealing with smaller companies, the DBE firms and other firms that you've taken on the obligation to mentor and to bring them through process and to make them ensure that they're successful. Some of these ramifications that happened during the period that I was talking, that they sort of got stuck with, I mean, it's hard for them to accept this. That to me is flags requiring the need for escalation clauses. And then I guess finally, when you do study these indices that are in these contracts, at times there is quite significant bookends when you start to see, well, really what gets sucked into these and what fall out of these. So I think when you are looking at jobs, that's also an important consideration. I think that's really, Ken, what I would like to say right now. I know I sort of gave the other side of the fence perspective here.
Tony, a couple of quick questions. One, are you seeing an increase in escalation clauses since the start of COVID? Are you starting to see more escalation clauses and contracts that you're bidding on?
Yes, I would say in an attempt to move the needle slightly from zero escalation clauses.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second, and I'll ask Mike this as well. Have you had any experience with post-bid escalation clauses like Justin described?
I would say the beauty of what Justin presented is he had an underrun and a significant allowance, and he could reallocate. Right. I would have said that our experience right now on certainly the jobs I'm involved in is more that they're slightly larger jobs, so it is more that the owner is presenting an approach to addressing escalation, and it's usually with an indices type approach of relying on indices and then picking what they believe is the most dominant products that fall within these indices.
Last question, Tony, before we go over to Mike. Have there been projects, long in duration, big in dollar amounts, that have had zero escalation clauses, risk shifting all to the contractor, that you and your company have chose not to bid on because of that?
I would say it's a component of a decision not to bid. It's not the sole component. It's almost like, yeah.
All right, fair enough. All right, great. Thanks, Tony. Now, the last of our panel, Mike Roach, again, unbelievably experienced with Trailer Brothers, their chief estimator, and a significant writer as part of the underground construction community. Mike, it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on the escalation clause.
Well, I'll start by addressing your question you had for both Tony and myself. Yeah, I have experience with an escalation clause like Justin's, I mean, exactly like Justin's. You know, he's our client, right? So he really kind of built us out that he didn't have to. Him and his partners at AlexRenew, you know, they saw a problem on a job, and they faced it head on in the best possible way they could. Since I'm last, I'm just going to kind of wrap up and pile on a little bit. What Tony said, based on what we see on the contractor side, and you know, escalation in some form or fashion has always been a contractor risk. Okay? It Tony said there's labor escalation, there's material escalations, there's fuel escalations, things like that. Similar to what Tony said, we can look out on labor escalation because there's existing agreements in place, where we can look back and see where the agreements have gone in the past few years to estimate fairly closely where we think that labor cost is going to go on an annual basis and make those adjustments. For materials and commodities and projects, it's always been you have to rely on initially what you get from your suppliers. Concrete suppliers will typically tell you add X bucks a yard on January 1st. Rebar guys will say add so much a ton on January 1st every year. Okay. For other commodities, it's not as clear cut. Nowadays, you can get a quotation at bid time, and when you read the fine print, that price is good until tomorrow. Right? It's not even good until you turn the bid in, or you have a project to award where you can actually sign people up to subcontracts and purchase orders. And it's getting worse. And there's a couple of reasons for it. I think there's 3 reasons why escalation clauses are needed more now than ever. One is the hyperinflation that we're facing now due to COVID and a couple of geopolitical instances that Tony sought out. We've got these longer duration projects. When Tony and I were younger men, we could take a look at concrete and rebar escalation on our typical 3.5 year job and be pretty close with it in our bids, okay? And reduce that risk to our employers. Now you got jobs going out there 7-8 years. Who knows what's going to happen to the price of these commodities or fuel 7 or 8 years out. If I could predict that, I wouldn't be on this webinar. I'd be sitting on a beach someplace, all right? Thinking about the rest of the working class. And the other thing that Tony didn't mention that comes into it also is the fact that a lot of these jobs are design build, right? Now, Doug, you all don't do design build. Justin, you've been involved, I've been involved with you on several design build efforts. That just throws in another bit of uncertainty, especially equipment on the job. That's not just rebar or concrete. There's different systems that aren't fully designed. Gates, valves, pumps, things like that need to be designed. You can't really get a price on that at bid time. The best you can get is an indication today what that might cost you to buy it today. And a polite note from the vendor saying, when you have this figured out, you know in 2 years exactly what you want to buy, come tell us and we'll give you a price. Right? So the onus is really on the contractors at that point to decide what are they going to do with those numbers. How are we going to escalate? What is the risk? It is risk, and there's only one way contractors deal with that risk. Well, 2, as I said, you decide not to bid, but assuming you're going to bid the job, there's only one way to deal with that risk. That's to add money for it, to cover the risk. Another thing is, what escalation clauses mean, or should mean to contractors, is that they're a way to reduce that risk. They're not a magic pill or the silver bullet to take it away. Right? It's something to help take that risk away and bring that level down where you can swallow a little better, or you think you can estimate what that difference is going to be. Okay. You go to a lot of your suppliers and they really don't care about your indices that you're using. They say, golly gee, that's really wonderful. But we're going to tell you what our escalation is year after year, or when you want to buy it. But the thing folks need to realize is these clauses aren't for the suppliers. They're for the contractors. Because the contractors are the ones who have to buy these commodities. Okay? And what can happen is you can get to a situation where your suppliers' prices on things are going to increase faster than those indices do. So there's a gap there, right? So it's not 100% coverage. There's a gap there, depending on the language of your escalation clause. And what's that gap? you have to try and guess it, figure out what that gap is. That's how you measure the risk. Okay, it'll reduce the risk, but doesn't eliminate it. The other question is, what did I put together? What should escalation clauses mean to suppliers? It probably doesn't mean a whole lot to them because they really don't care about it in general. What they should mean to subcontractors. If you have an escalation clause in your contract that flows down to your subcontractors, you need to let them know as soon as possible that that clause exists. What it says and what it doesn't say, and help them to understand it. Because helping them understand these clauses reduce risk on their side. And when you can help them reduce their risk, you're going to get a better number from them to include in your bid. So it's important to walk your subcontractors, especially the smaller ones, through it. Make sure they understand what they're getting into and what they're not getting into.
Excellent, Mike. Let me ask you a question, Mike. Do you think that escalation clauses overall reduce the bid prices?
It depends on what they say. Right? And what they don't say. I think in general that they should. Because they are risk reducing tools. So it should pull some of the risk out of the job and reduce bidders' prices.
So are there, if you're bidding a job for Trailer Brothers and you see as part of the risk shifting by the owner, a no escalation clause, and it's a large dollar volume bid, multi-year project, are you inclined not to bid? Or is that one of the deciding factors if there's a zero escalation clause?
Well, I don't really want to get into what Trailer Brothers bid strategies are.
Okay.
136 people on this call.
Hey, yeah. Tony asked.
Plus
Tony gave me
for
$5 to ask
137,
that.
right? But I can tell you that we didn't see them until very recently. They didn't exist in our industry, so we didn't have it. So we've always had this issue with contractor risk, and we bid jobs. But in today's environment and economy, it's something that ought to be plopped on people's risk registers to consider.
So is it your prediction, Mike, that in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see more escalation clauses? In some form,
I would
on
hope
large
so.
projects?
I would hope so, because the next thing I want to bring up to spark conversation is should these escalation clauses become something that's permanent in our industry, or should they just, if the economy takes a better turn here in the next year or two, which we all hope it does, should everybody just take their escalation clauses and put them in the shredder? And I don't think they should, because I think they're still going to be applicable in certain situations. Again, if inflation is under control, we still have these mega projects out there that everybody's hyped on. They got these long durations. We really can't predict, reliably predict escalation out that far, or the design build environment where you still have lots of unknowns when you bid a job. So I think they should stick around. I would like to see more of them in certain situations. Yes.
Excellent. We've gotten just, I think, hopefully everybody listening to the podcast sees that we've gotten a really good, robust baseline discussion from our four panelists. Let me encourage you that if you have a question, put it in your Q&A. This is for the panelists. I think it's the first one, Justin and Doug, if you would weigh in on it, and then Tony or Mike, if you have thoughts. But the first question I see is, did your escalation agreement incentivize the contractor to purchase the materials earlier during a period of rising prices? I think, Justin, that might be the most appropriate for you, if you could start off that question.
Thanks, Ken. I think the main concern of us implementing an escalation clause was to make sure we were procuring equipment in a timely manner, because we are in a schedule-driven project. We, again, as I mentioned, we're on a mandated schedule to get done by July 1st, 2025. And a major driver of us implementing an escalation clause was to incentivize Trailer Shay to purchase equipment at its current price and not wait for it to come back down. Especially, you know, as Mike mentioned, there are really some specialized pieces of equipment we've got on this job. Our deep breaker system, for example, I think in escrow bid docs, you know, the change between escrow bid docs and time of purchase was about 1.5 million. And that's highly specialized equipment that you can't use indices for. So I think in short, yes, we were trying to incentivize the purchase of equipment up front.
Let me follow that up with Tony and Mike. Do you think an escalation agreement incentivizes the contractor to purchase material during a period of rising prices, or do you think it has no impact?
Well, I would say that you don't need to be incentivized to buy what you can early. You know, it's common practice to try to buy out a project early to lock in pricing, right? To hedge on inflation and escalation. The sooner you can lock in price for a variety of things, the better. Rebar included, but you can't buy ready-mix concrete in advance.
Right.
But you can get a purchase order to lock in your price escalation for the next 2 or 3 years. Right, you can do those things at the beginning of the job. Certainly anything that's long lead on a job, you're always going to try and get on as quickly as you can and get that price locked in and get them manufacturing. To say that an escalation clause would stop us from doing that is, I would say no.
But Mike, let me tag on a second question, and we'll turn it over to Tony. Second question is, with escalation clauses, isn't there a risk of contractors not seeking the best price to allow escalation clauses to be triggered? Mike, take that first, and then we'll flip it over to Tony for his answers.
I would say there's absolutely no risk of that, because first things first, you got to be low bidder to get the job.
Right.
If you're not low bidder, the rest of it doesn't matter.
But once you're the low bidder, I think the question is there a fear that someone could be, you know, playing gamesmanship, trying to get that extra dollar and contracting strategy? I take it you would say no, right?
I would say no. And if you go back to one of the first things Justin said is, you know, that they developed a real trust with their contractor. And I think if you didn't have trust in your contractor, you could never have pulled off what Justin pulled. You could never make that happen for just those reasons. But
Excellent.
I mean, I mean, you just correct me when I'm wrong, Justin, because I'm not on that job every day, but you know, that's an open book process they're going through. And it has to
Excellent.
be. It has to be.
Tony, can you weigh in on that?
I think what Mike said earlier was along the lines of, you know, the clauses we would want the clauses to be are essentially a no win, no gain type deal. It squares the playing field. It makes it's just fair and equitable, meaning there's not monetary gain from sort of playing the system. I would have to say the clauses I've been around have had that in play, meaning if the index, for example, is tracked and it goes up and down, that's what you've signed up for. Meaning if the index is lower than when you started, there's a negative number instead of a positive number. And you know, I think that's totally out there too. I mean, this thing is this to me, escalation clauses are there to be fair. That's it, and shouldn't be abused on either side.
Doug, I have a question for you. Do you see, in your experience with no escalation clause, have you seen disputes or issues that the contractor might have solved through an escalation clause, morph over, and they're using the dispute process where they're trying to get money to cover their gap in escalation through other means?
We have seen some examples of that. We have seen some general contractors basically just pass through escalation claims that they've received from suppliers and subcontractors, where they just paste a cover letter on it and send it our way. And then we get to be the bad guy and say no and hand it back to them. Yeah, we've had several of those. I do want to go back to your previous question though, Ken, on materials and equipment, because there's a couple different things we've seen and done on that topic. So on several projects, we have gone out and pre-negotiated with equipment suppliers, the purchase of the equipment, and then included that price on the bid form. And then the sales agreement or terms and conditions, the vendor's quote is included in the contract document. So everybody's bidding the same thing, but it also kind of minimizes some of the gaming by the equipment suppliers, especially on specialized pieces of equipment that have long lead times. And the other thing we've seen on our controls upgrade jobs, which we have several going here concurrently, is the contractor basically issued the PO for the equipment the day the project was awarded.
Interesting.
Because we knew it was, we knew what all our PLC equipment was and how many cards we needed and how many racks you needed, how many power supplies you needed, and immediately issued that PO to lock it in, both pricing and to get it into the queue for manufacturing and delivery. Because some of this stuff, it's a year plus before you'll see it.
Excellent. Justin, we have a question for you. How does an owner offering an escalation clause avoid paying twice if the contract already has escalation built into its price?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time talking about that. And I guess one of our initial thoughts were to go back to the escrow bid documents and open them and make a determination whether or not what was included as a contingency, and then trying to prove what that contingency was for escalation. I think when we talk through it with trailer, our understanding is escalation is in each line item on the job. So what we decided to do, the way we got around that, is we made trailer responsible for the first 5%. Leading up to our job, leading up to bid, escalation was around 3.2% over 20 years average. So we thought the first 5% on the contractor was a good way to make sure that some of their contingency was being used towards escalation as well, and not all on the owner. So that's how we handled it here.
Excellent.
I mean, we negotiated that number. It wasn't a, we're saying 5%. We kind of talked through it to make sure it was a fair number as a team and coordinated that with the contractor.
Next question, I think is best for Tony and Mike. For a longer duration job, would you be amenable to put on your bid the escalation for the first 3 years if the owner is willing to develop allowances to pay for the balance if they materialize? Kind of like a hybrid approach, take a risk for the first 3 and then have some type of allowance or some mechanism, right? If on the longer duration, there's a trigger. First, I'd ask Tony, Mike, have you seen any approach like that? And what's your thoughts to kind of a hybrid escalation clause? Tony, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I haven't seen the hybrid. And I would say it certainly sounds attractive on face value, because that's the part that gets tricky, is longer duration jobs where the degree of difference is growing as the job gets longer. So yeah, I would say that would be certainly something to sort of study a lot more for sure.
Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, of course, Tony and I both have to read what it says before we, jump up and down with glee. But on the surface, it sounds, like a good scheme. It certainly does reduce risk in the job, right? And it has the opportunity to provide owners with price certainty on escalation at least, right? On escalation clause. So it's probably worth investigating and exploring.
Excellent. I think I'm going to jump around. There was a question to the owners. Are you considering pre-purchasing long lead items and volatile commodities? Doug, I think you answered that with your last segment. That's exactly what your strategy was, right?
Yes, and that's what we're doing.
Okay.
And on our plant projects with specialized process equipment, yes, there are pieces that we do pre-negotiate and then include that price in the bid documents.
Justin, are you doing any type of predicting of those issues and trying to do a similar approach to?
Yes, all of our design bid build jobs, we typically have a pre-purchase for our equipment. Two of the jobs under the AlexRenew umbrella included pre-purchase for some of the plant projects. We could not do that for the design build job because it went out as a 30% design.
Justin, answer this question from one of our participants. How do you get the contractor to prove escalation? We already touched on it, but just go through that again if you would.
I think we're not trying to have the contractor prove escalation. We're letting the market tell us. And each when you go to the producer price indices, there's countless indices in there for the cost of commodities, and that tells you that you've got escalation. We don't need the contractor to prove it. We trust them on their word that they're being impacted, and we're using the PPI as a way to pay it.
So this is for the entire group question. In the absence of escalation clauses, what is the best approach to A, determine entitlement, and B, determine quantum? What happens if the PPI index changes regularly? It would seem that the economic review would need to take place every 6 months. This would be a challenge to adjust lump sum items in a contract repeatedly over a 5-year project. Mike, you've had some experience from the contractor's perspective, right? With the escalation clause. How would you answer those questions?
Well, the first part of it is that if there's no escalation clause in the contract, you're not going to get very far with the claim.
Right.
You're not going to get to talking about merit or quantum. It's just not going to happen, right? It doesn't happen for the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District because they don't have the clause. But how you do this, it's an accounting effort. And what's happening now on the AlexRenew job is it's a monthly accounting effort. And it's showing, it's reviewing the indices and reviewing actual invoices. And that's a lump sum job, essentially. We've got a bunch of unit price items and allowances, but it's a lump sum bid. It's quite a schedule of values breakdown, but when you're buying concrete, you get invoices every month for that. And you just compare that to your original purchase orders and the indices. It's an accounting effort. And then we had to put that on the job to just to handle it. And you
Doug, here's a question
on your side, Justin.
Yep,
Correct.
excellent. Doug, here's a question for you. Have owners considered using another delivery method, i.e. CM at risk, where the GMP is agreed upon further in the project schedule to mitigate the volatility of commodity pricing? Have you guys ever looked at different delivery methods in an attempt to decrease the issues with commodity pricing?
For our larger projects, we have not. They've been traditional design, bid, build, lump sum bid contracts.
Okay.
We have had a series of projects within our plants where we have gone design build with a progressive design build that's outlined here in the state of Ohio, where you select on quals, you develop a 30% design, you price it, you create your GMP, And then, yes, there is a much better chance then of knowing a little bit more where the market's going in your pricing once you negotiate that GMP.
Excellent. Justin, how about you? Have you ever looked at or considered different contracting models to handle issues of this risk shifting on commodity issues and escalation?
I think when we approached this program, we looked at, all available procurement methods, CMAR, progressive, fixed price, design build, and design bid build. I think we made a decision on schedule to go with fixed price, design build. It was the approach that got us done quickest. I think looking back and experience in this job, you can see a potential benefit to looking at CMAR progressive to get more price certainty around design. I don't know if that necessarily helps with escalation, but it certainly helps with design certainty. And if you read the Traveler study, that they're pushing CMAR and progressive for that reason.
Okay, so last question in the Q&A, and if anybody has additional Q&As, make sure you put them in. We'll try to get, I think we've gotten through all of them so far, but Tony, let me direct it to you, and then Mike, I'd like you to touch on this as well. Given that the PPI is on a downward trend for the foreseeable future, why should I, as an owner, implement an escalation clause? Also, should any escalation apply to price de-escalation? Tony, you wanna tackle that one first?
I'll answer the first part of this with almost a question. And it's along the lines of who could have predicted COVID? Who could have predicted some of these major geopolitical events that have really elevated the importance of escalation clauses, period? So I think what, as an industry, we're reacting to is extremes. But at the same time, we can't predict when the extremes would happen. So with respect to the benefits, as I mentioned that earlier, like if the PPI is going down, I think that has to be the realization as you structure your contracts with entities that would fall under this umbrella of an index going down, that you are very transparent into, hey, if it's going up, you're going to be unaffected. If it's going down, yeah, your revenue will be going down, but bear in mind, you're still at the same position. So it more becomes how you want to present this to people within the team that pursues the job or is building the job, how they will be part of the sort of accounting part of this to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Educating folks downstream of this on your team is a huge, huge deal, because you don't want to be going to people after the fact and say, oh yeah, the index has gone down, so therefore that means in your case, I'm cutting a pay estimate.
Excellent.
Hopefully
Tony,
that addresses your question.
that was great. Mike, you want to add on to that?
I don't think I can. I think he said it. Well said, Tony.
That's good. Well, I have us 6 months over our time. I'm just doing a quick review to see if we answered everything. Here's a question for the panel that I've seen. I head up the construction law group at Venable. We primarily represent owners. We've been on a number of huge projects that have gone 5 to 7 years. Our claim to fame is we've done well over 40 billion with no litigation. I see a lot of these large projects have litigation. And the question that I'd have for the panel is do you see and I know, let me preface it by saying I don't think either one of our owners, Doug or Justin, are trying to do risk shifting to an inordinate degree, and just saddle up with whoever the contractor is. But I would start with Tony and Mike. When I see projects that are plagued in litigation, that have problems, 90% of the time, I do see contracts that, as a mediator, as an arbitrator, there probably are clauses that the arbitration panel, the court, are most likely not going to find enforceable. They're going to bend over backwards to read the contract against the owner. I'd like your thoughts on projects where you haven't bid, or you're not likely to bid because there's too much risk shifting. And then, maybe some of the best projects are the ones you didn't get. You see them later, right? Engulfed in litigation. You both touched on it, but how do you view, if you don't see any escalation clause and you see a contract where the owner is aggressively trying to do risk shifting to the contractor, and you see others willing to bid on that? Give me your thoughts as to what you think that does to the industry, with the inability to meet schedule, litigation, inability to meet cost. Mike, you've written, extensively on the history of tunneling, history of issues. What's your prediction for the next 5 to 10 years for those listening? What's your prediction on that risk shifting, litigation, impact on overall impact to the industry?
Well, if we see an owner who is, pushing all the risk on the contractor, it's always a red flag, right? Why are they doing it? They need to be fair, right? And if there's enough of that, why would any contractor bid? But contractors do bid with owners like that. Yeah, we've had a bunch of, a few where it's like, a few years down the road, it's like, boy, that's probably the best job we didn't get when you look what's going on over there now. But, risk comes in many forms. And that's why risk registers have many lines on them. The best jobs that we see are the jobs that have partnering on them, and that the partners to the project, embrace it and just try and get along from day one and work it out. If they're
Excellent.
on the job.
Tony, your last thoughts in terms of what you're seeing in the industry and risk shifting and how escalation clauses kind of play into the mix? Tony, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I think escalation clauses generally are certainly one component of the contract evaluation. When you bid, you're committing to signing up for the duration. So our evaluation is honestly the byproduct of lessons learned. So we certainly don't want to be repeating bad lessons. I think, ultimately, it is the relationship on the job. Project teams and representation from both sides, that's a huge deal. But honestly, if the contracts are just too onerous and slide risk unnecessarily to us, well, why would we put ourselves through it? Because on the flip side of it, the owner's representative, he's representing the contract that you signed. His job really is to enforce the contract or apply the contract. And I do think everything that we try and do is ideally shape the contract terms during a pursuit phase that makes it more palatable and easy to live with if we were successful.
Excellent. All right.
I think Ken, really quick from the other side.
Sure.
On risk, when we approach this job, we try to put a fair and equitable contract together. We listen to feedback from the industry throughout the procurement process. And at some point too, there's risk being bid on jobs that we're just not aware of as an owner. Unless we're having frank conversations to be able to understand what that risk is, we were $100 million off on our estimate and couldn't figure out why. We're not seeing some of the risks that might be seen by the contractors. We're not in the day-to-day building jobs across the United States. So I think it's sharing that risk and sharing that perspective that we need to be able to get to better prices.
Excellent. Doug, let me give you the last word. You have a long history of delivering projects, even though your contracts don't have the escalation clause. I know from your comments and talking with you that you're very proactive in trying to mitigate issues in the field. Let's get your last thoughts on that.
So in the last 12 years, we've really been very fortunate. We have completed many projects with some very tricky geotechnical issues associated with them. And we've worked our way through every one of them. We've resolved every issue. We have yet to have litigation. Although we use DRBs and DRAs, we haven't had a hearing. Because we've been able to take care of the issues one-on-one with the contractor and keep the projects moving. And I believe that we deal with our contractors very fairly.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear at the DRBF. I want to thank Mike Vitale again for helping put together this excellent panel. And the last plug I would give for everybody is look for our annual meeting, the DRBF. That's in September 27th and 28th. Pat Galloway is the program chair. We got a really excellent 2-day. It's virtual, so you can listen in at your convenience. We also have an August 24th regional program in DC. And our goal at the DRBF, we are the leading think tank institution on all things dispute review board. And the goal, I think that all 4 of the panelists have talked about is trying to get those issues resolved at the business table in the field as quickly as possible. That's the best way to have your project close to schedule and on budget. And I think that Doug summed that up very nicely. So on behalf of all the panelists, thank you for participating. I hope everybody that listened in, I think you got a great perspective on escalation clauses. On behalf of the DRBF, thank you very much for participating and for listening in on what I know is a great topic. So thank you all.